Welcome to the community moderators panel. I'm Kate Gardner, and I'll be moderating this session. We're going to talk about the realities of working in news and really across across verticals to manage communities that may otherwise be challenging. And with me on this panel is the fabulous Liz Plank. Liz, could you introduce yourself?
Oh, I have to introduce myself. Okay, I'm Liz Plank. I am a producer and correspondent at Vox.com. I am actually producing and hosting a web series around the presidential election. I'm still figuring out a name for it. If you have any ideas, let me know. And yeah, I'm a woman on the internet. That's why I'm here.
It's a perilous thing. Nate?
I'm Nate Lubin. I'm currently a consultant based in New York, working on my own on a few different projects, figuring out the next big thing. But previously, I ran the Office of Digital Strategy at the White House, and before that, I ran online marketing for the 2012 Obama campaign.
Right on. And Rob?
Yep, I'm Rob Markman. I'm a veteran music journalist with experience. I was over at MTV News for a number of years, and now I'm at Genius as their artist relations manager. My main job function is to take the artist community and bring them to our Genius online community and have them share ideas and just talk and interact. Yeah, it's the gist of it.
I think, first of all, I have to read this statement from OHS, which is the Online Harassment Summit where you are. South by Southwest is committed to creating an enjoyable and memorable experience for all of its attendees and speakers. To help create such an environment, we kindly ask that all participants of the Online Harassment Summit act responsibly and treat each other with respect, empathy, and compassion. South by Southwest reserves the right to revoke South by Southwest entry credentials from any participant whose conduct is deemed inappropriate by South by Southwest or the Austin Police Department. And lastly, personal items are prohibited from being left unattended for any reason. Please do not save seats with your personal items. Any item left unattended will be confiscated and destroyed by the Austin Police Department. No exceptions. Okay. So we're stepping back to talking about our variety of experiences. I've mostly worked with news organizations on figuring out how to scale content management systems in a way, or excuse me, comment management systems in a way that makes it a reasonable job for someone to manage a community. But Liz, could you talk a little bit about your experience as sort of an individual who doesn't have those tools?
Yeah. So yeah, like I started. Got into journalism sort of through the back door, started petitions online, and sort of as an activist realized that writing and using social media was a great tool to have a voice and find your voice and find other voices to create and mobilize movements. And so yeah, growing from zero to a couple thousand followers in a very short amount of time became, or I guess I don't think about it as stressful, but I think it's a constant stress. I try not to check them in the morning, and I try not to check them at all. I think Twitter mentions with time it's just become like a thing that I just don't look at. And it's moved, yeah, it's like such a shame because there's so many positive, great things happening and interactions that you want to have with people. And unfortunately, the amount of harassment that you can get, especially when you're talking about issues of equality. I think it's very interesting that the harassment summit is the only place where someone had to check my bag to come in. And I think it's great that we have security, but it's like unfortunate that the place where we are talking about the importance of security is perhaps the less safe space. And one where we need additional security. And I think that's a kind of a perfect, unfortunate metaphor for what it's like to write on the internet and be on the internet when you are trying to create safer spaces for everyone.
Right on. Nate, could you speak a little bit to sort of the scale that you experienced, which is kind of the opposite of Liz's experience?
Sure. So on the White House side, it is a constant challenge of sort of the exact opposite. You have a broadcast medium, which is sort of how these channels are too often treated by default, because you have a news announcement, say, or a breaking update you have to give. President breaks news, we have to cover it in some way. But the challenge is how do you figure out ways to make that more meaningful and have it more directly engage with the people who are there. So we would seek out different ways of kind of building that into the program, and it has the side benefit of in a scenario where other than literal threats where Secret Service would get involved, it's tough for the White House as an institution or even high-profile people to respond individually to less than positive content. But you use tactics like we did a thing around the State of the Union is a very high-profile moment at the White House. We had this thing called the Big Block of Cheese Day. For anyone who's a West Wing TV show fan, that might ring a bell. But what that was a way of having members of the administration across all different issues take to social media, take to online channels to respond to questions. And it's set up in such a way that the content is going to be much more positive, much more tied to particular issues that are relevant and important, and you get a much more fruitful, positive conversation out of it.
Right on. And to that end, Rob, your community has basically been constructed as a positive space, and you haven't had either of the issues that these two guys have had just because you guys started out at Genius with the intent of making this constructive community. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. And just what Genius is, for anybody who doesn't know, is a lyric annotation site with user-generated content. So we put the lyrics up, the users put the lyrics up on the site if their new favorite song drops, and then the community works together to annotate these lyrics. It started as Rap Genius, but it's now just Genius and serves all genres. But particularly even like in rap songs, the slang changes so constantly, the music is in constant need of decoding. So the community works together to kind of break down the artist's intent and what they mean. And because the community has a goal, we have about 45 million visitors a month, and out of those 45 million, about 25,000 active users every week. And those users are working with a goal in mind to kind of come up with the best annotation for a specific lyric. And they work in teams. Sometimes you'll see our annotations might have one single contributor who comes up with a really good annotation, but we have editors, so sometimes it takes two contributors. Sometimes, on a popular song like Beyonce Formation, you might see a single lyric with 10 contributors because it took the community, it took 10 people to kind of come up with the right thing that everybody felt good about to explain that lyric. And because everybody is so focused on creating the best annotation, we find that because they have a goal, their behavior is they work together rather than against each other in many of the instances.
And Liz, in your experience, can you take a community that exists like that, that exists in the opposite, that spends a lot of its time being mean to each other or things like that? Do you think that we can revert to something that's more constructive?
I mean, that's the dream. That's why we're all here today, and to build, a digital space that's positive. I don't know. I mean, I'm naturally optimistic, so I mean, the internet has. I would not be sitting here or be having the honor and privilege to do what I love if the internet didn't exist. And the internet, I love the internet. I love social media, and I love the connections that I've been able to make and the people I've been able to speak to through it. But it is difficult on those spaces because there is no controlled environment. There is no, I guess there is a common, no, everyone has different goals. I mean, Twitter is a perfect example. Like, I go on Twitter for a very different reason than like an MRA activist, which is a men's rights activist, for those of you who aren't familiar, would go on there to do. And so the issue is that we're all in that space together, and that's why it's up to those platforms to create and really defend what they want that platform to be for. And I've been, I'm enthusiastic about companies like Twitter and Facebook, especially really taking a stand. I mean, when I started in media 3 years ago, we had this FB Rape hashtag campaign that was started by amazing women like Soraya Chemaly, who spoke on a panel today, and a bunch of other women who co-signed this letter saying, like, there's all of this hate speech that's allowed to just exist on Facebook. And it was gender hate speech, it was like calling for violence against women, and what they did was basically associate all of the horrible images and show, like, tweet to advertisers, and we're like, do you want your advertisement for, like, Dove soap next to, you know, a picture of a woman being gagged? And getting the advertisers involved, or calling them out, I guess, and placing the responsibility on them, put the pressure on Facebook, because you got to follow the money, unfortunately. So, but the thing is that's really interesting is that we're using those spaces to organize, to try and get them to pay attention. So we can't just be like, we're all going to get off Twitter, we're all going to get off Facebook. Like, we need those platforms to actually organize. So hopefully we'll be seeing people come together and those companies taking responsibility for what they allow to exist on their platforms, but there needs to be more of a concerted effort.
Mm-hmm. Nate, could you talk a little bit about the work that you guys did at the White House to have those positive spaces and sort of how that turned into campaign strategy online? We were speaking about it a little bit before.
Yeah, I mean, so I think, you know, we can also speak to actual campaigning,
Yeah.
which is a little bit different. But at the White House, you know, I mentioned the earlier example. There's a number of other ones, but the idea is leading with the broader message of inclusiveness and leading with the content itself that you want to be shared and you want to get out there, rather than having you know, a format where it's more resistant and more inclusive to bad ideas. So an example of that, we did a thing called the Student Film Festival, which was the first ever, you know, it was for students to submit YouTube videos and content. We got thousands of submissions. Unprecedented. We had an event in the East Room and the president involved and all this different stuff. But it was teed up in such a way where, you know, while it was open to the public and anyone could get involved and anyone didn't get involved, the frame of it made it much more tight. It's much harder to be, let's say, objectionable when you're talking about a 14-year-old's video than, you know, an adult who's got a different context and different, you know, a different imperative attached to it. So there's things like that where you have an ability to drive positive engagement. Of course, when you have more controversial issues that can be more challenging, you're going to, you know, go full force into that anyway. On the campaign side, I think it's a little different. You know, the organizing component of this, which wasn't my direct part of the campaign, but was one that I worked closely with. You know, in 2012, a lot of the work was around building communities that were tied to particular offline tactics and not just letting the online space exist for its own purpose. And I think that was really the key to having people who were you know, participating very actively, not just, you know, a random tweet or a random Facebook post, but really being part of the organization, feeling a connection, and that, you know, makes it much harder for people that are going to be you know, attacking the organization or just putting out bad content to be a part of it. And that was kind of started very early on, very consciously, and kind of use that positive organization to, you know, be a self-fulfilling you know, process over the course of, you know, 18 months, let's say.
Rob, before we were talking a little bit about the ways that you guys have been managing user behavior, so putting people into penalty boxes, things like that. Can you talk about how that's working and if it's working?
Yeah, you know, so one of the things at Genius, first of all of the employees and the staffers at Genius, we all have accounts, we all actively use the site, we're all members of the community, and, you know, we have this ethos with us that we're not necessarily policing the community, but modeling behavior as well. But, you know, you have sometimes, so I explained to you before that we had the annotations where everybody are working towards the goal. We also have open forums where anything goes, and sometimes anything goes over in the open forums, and, you know, there's language, there is harassment. It's not 0%, it's very low. But we have different levels of, you know, community staffers. So we have editors and mediators and moderators who kind of step in, and we penalty box. We have what we call, quote unquote, a penalty box, where if a user harasses another or if there's an incident, you'll penalty box the offender and do private message, do mediation. And through that mediation, the mediator can decide and the community decides whether or not, you know, this is just an offense, somebody was having a bad day, how long should we suspend the account? But usually through mediation, we are able to work most problems out.
Liz, you were saying that Vox has some innovative policies in this way too. Can you talk a little bit about what they're doing?
Yeah, Vox Media actually is hosting the happy hour next door after this panel in honor of the hack harassment event that they're organizing here at South by, but also part of a larger effort that they're really taking on actually as a result of the conversations that occurred when this whole summit was organized. And so, yeah, Vox is partnering with Dell, which is a huge corporation, and the Lady Gaga's foundation, which I'm totally forgetting. What's it called? Her foundation? Born This Way. Yeah, sorry. So what's interesting with that is, yeah, a media company partnering with a big company, a big tech company, but also with a foundation. And they really want to just put all of those people in the room together. The issue that we're trying to solve with that is to disrupt this, the efforts that are all happening in silos right now. And part of me thinks that the fact that I'm like so happy that South by created this summit, but I'm worried that we're just talking to each other, and that's what I feel like I do all day. I think we need to talk across fields, and my expertise is very different from the expertise of a developer or someone who studies behavioral science and understands human behavior, and a woman who's gone through a lot of harassment, has a unique experience and expertise that she can share, and putting all those people in the same room is basically what we're trying to do. And we're reaching out to partners like Facebook and Twitter and hoping that they join us. Yeah, it's very new, and we're figuring things out, so we're very open to suggestions or people who want to join us. But basically, we're just starting the conversation, putting people in a room and trying to figure out a solution to this. And that's sort of what Vox is doing externally to address the issue. But internally, there's also a lot of awareness and effort put into what it's like to be a writer or be an editor or work at a media company and have to deal with harassment. So we were just talking about this before, but if I'm a writer and I'm in my office and a guy barges into the office and starts screaming at me and you fucking C-word, my boss would definitely be like, that's not acceptable, and throw them out and ensure that there are safety measures to prevent that from happening. But a lot of the harassment that we're talking about and a lot of the hostility is happening online, and so my boss or my manager is perhaps not aware that it's even happening because it's not even happening on the private space of the company, even digitally. So in the comment section, for example, it's happening on Twitter, it's happening on Facebook, it's happening on all of these platforms that I'm required to use for my job, but that are unsafe spaces for me. So it is truly a workplace issue. It's an online internet issue that we need to address. But for companies to see it as, if I don't listen to my employee who's going through harassment or who's dealing with this issue, I'm actively agreeing to a hostile work environment. And I've been very lucky to work at State. Before Vox, I was at Mike, and they took my concerns very seriously. And whenever one of our writers got emails with rape threats and death threats, and they were very supportive, not only in do you want time off, do you want us to help you with anything, but also in actually we removed the comment section altogether because it was just too dangerous for employees, and there was just what's the benefit here? So yeah, that's kind of.
Let's spin off on that. So guys, how do you discuss? Sunit, you consult as well as I do. How do you discuss the value proposition of having a community that supports if it requires so much work and leads to so many bad things?
It's a loaded question. I think it speaks to trying to dive into the specific purpose that the organization is trying to take on, and the reason why you have a community is to address a problem that, or a consumer base, customer base, whatever it is that you're trying to take an action, whether that's buy a product or engage in an online media environment or whatever it may be. And if you tie in the positive nature of what's going on to the brand itself, that's got to be the key to it. But I think the second part, and you're sort of getting this, is, and you're talking about channels that you don't control yourself. There needs to be more built in the moderation side. There needs to be more imperative driven around empowering the people that are running these organizations to enforce norms of positivity that can be very hard right now. You see that all the time. I don't personally use Twitter very much now that I don't work at the White House. My official account was reassigned. And it's not, I use it for consumption of news more than actually putting out content. And I think that's part of it. It's, I experienced firsthand what it's like to have stuff go at you, and it's not particularly pleasant. But it's a reason to make sure you're engaging when it makes sense.
And Rob, so you guys, your value is the community. Like,
Yeah.
Genius's community is pretty much its value prop, I assume, to your investors. Can you talk a little bit about how investors are talking back to you, or how the business is building itself around that user growth?
Genius absolutely would be nothing without the users. And in terms of our investors and just where the company is going, I think that is very attractive because we have a captivated and active audience built into what the site is and the ethos of the site, and everybody working towards one common goal. Has investors, have we fully learned how to harness that yet? Like, I think at Genius, the first step is to build a very good website with a very good experience, and the rest will figure it out. And I think these are the next steps for us. But we have to prove that it works, and so far we've had really, really great interactions and positive community experiences. And just going to Liz's point, I think Liz made an incredible point about a coworker wouldn't come into her office and scream things that somebody might tweet at her online. One, because that's not accepted in the workplace, but two, it's easier not to excuse the bad online behavior. Generally, people will tweet things at you or say things online that they wouldn't say to your face because it is horrible when it comes out of your mouth. And what we strive to do at Genius, too, is we strive to balance, like, online and in real life experiences. Our community in Australia took it upon themselves to meet up one day and just annotate Kendrick Lamar lyrics. Or we have a really, really active community around Hamilton, the Lin-Manuel Miranda play, and they've been annotating, and Lin gets on the site, and they get excited whenever Lin comes on the site and likes, there's a cosign button, which is like the Instagram equivalent to like, so they get excited if they did a really good annotation and, Lin hits the cosign button. And the president of our company actually took one of the top scholars of Hamilton just 2 weeks ago. They went to go see the play together. We have a live event space in our Brooklyn office, so we are actively thinking ways to invite the community and also create a real-life experience, so who's on the other end of that handle. You're not just talking with a handle, you're not just working with a handle. There's a real person with real feelings to consider before you communicate something ill to them.
Liz, what do you think? So we're both part of the list, which I run, and one of the things that's different between that community, which starts as a listserv and then becomes in real-life events, is that the way that we bring new members in is that we go out of our way to know who they are before we invite them to join us. What do you see? Do you think that it would be better for us as internet citizens to bring people in that curated fashion into the media communities that we run?
No, because then you're preaching to the choir. Like, I don't want to just write about feminism and pull in feminists and we're like, yeah, we all agree, great. Like, that's not the point. I think it's a valuable proposition and would solve a lot of issues, but at the same time, like, it just creates more, it's like the filter bubble, but for people. So, people just who agree with each other are speaking to each other. And I think actually a lot of the animosity comes from that, right? It's like, the other side, you're dehumanizing the other side. You're dehumanizing whoever is has that opinion. And I think, to your point, the anonymity aspect is really interesting. Like, I was recently on my first Virgin flight, which is really, really fabulous. And they have a thing where you can watch TV, and then there's a little remote, and you can comment and watch it with let's say I was sitting with my producer, and he was not sitting next to me, so we were you can watch the same show and then you have like a little account, like receipt number, and you can be like this is so great, like yeah, it's awesome. So we were watching this Disney show, and like we were just joking around and being like, oh my god. And then like a random person called Uma comes into like the show, and Uma just says, "You guys suck." And we're just like, both of us are like, oh my god, who's Uma? And we're like, who's, and she's like, she's seat 38, like, oh my god. And I'm just imagining like this towering, like Uma Thurman basically, but like super mean, like, and I'm just like, oh my god, who's, and then we just sort of like felt bad. And I had to go to the front of the plane for something, because we had other coworkers there. And I walked by and I was like, oh my god, I'm gonna walk by 38. And I look over, and it's a 7-year-old boy sitting with his mom next to him, who has no idea that he's just like insulting random plane goers, and like for no reason. And then I just start laughing, like I am crying, and I basically tell Billy, my producer, I'm like this is basically like Uma is the internet. Like that's just a metaphor for the internet. Like you get a comment like that, you get, you know, someone who just rips you apart, and then you just, that's all you think about, right? And you think about it over and over and over again. Whereas, you know, you get 100 people telling you that they love your writing or that they appreciate you, and you focus on that one person who doesn't like you, but that guy could be a 7-year-old little boy who really actually like doesn't even remember that he told me that I suck. And if I wouldn't have known he was a 7-year-old boy, I probably would still be thinking about why Uma hates me. Anyway, so all this to say, just, yeah, like don't let the haters get you down, I guess, because you don't know who they are.
Nate, what's a really constructive way that you have had a client or helped a client to deal with a trolling problem?
Well, I'll give an example that's not a client, but a friend of mine, I was telling one of these guys before this, but a friend of mine works at the company Nextdoor, which is a social networking site for specific areas, an offline equivalent, it's the online community for it, for neighborhoods. And she was telling me that they had had an issue early on when they were, you know, much smaller, where there was a neighborhood where there was a lot of harassment going on from a specific person. There was one guy who was poisoning this neighborhood, and the leader of the group there, you know, with the participation and help of the company or the follow-up with the company, actually saw the person in real life at a coffee shop or something, and walked right over to him and like had a conversation about it. It was like, hey, you're screwing up our thing, and this is awful, and you know, stop being an asshole, basically. And problem solved. You know, it's kind of an amazing forcing the anonymity to disappear for a second. You know, it's an unusual case. You can't do that everywhere. But the company felt personally responsible in a way to work with the person who was, you know, the community manager, you know, random stranger, and they figured out a way to get, you know, in a situation that could have spiraled out of control, gotten worse, and made it much better. So I think it's sort of illustrative of you know, if you have an organization which is trying to address these problems head on, and particularly one where there's a more closed community where these kinds of problems, if allowed to get in a bad space, would really undermine the whole reason why you're there, why you're being a part of it. Like, that's really the key. It's figuring out mechanisms to, whether they're, you know, offline, online, blocking, whatever it may be, but take it seriously and work on it.
Mm-hmm. Liz, when you're coming into Vox now, what are you thinking about making sure happens on this show versus what happened on Flip the Script around your community?
Around my community? Wait, what do you mean? Like, so that it's more...
How are you engaging with your audience? How do you think you may engage with your audience differently?
I mean, so Flip the Script was a show that I did at Mike, which looked at a variety of social issues and like flipped the script on them. So flipping the script on like reality, basically, to show inconsistencies or inequality and say that it shouldn't be that way. But it was like very like, this is how you should think about this, and if you don't, then like not go to hell, but like, you know, this is it. And it was a very like voicey in that way, and I am, like, I guess I do talk like that, and sometimes I should tone it down a bit. But I think it unfortunately created, or like I didn't reach as many people as I could have if I would have respected the other side a little bit more. And, you know, Ezra Klein, who's the editor-in-chief and founder of Vox.com, says it perfectly, but like that the voice of Vox, you want to represent the other side in a way that if the other side read that or saw that, would agree with you. So what I would do often, is just be like, I don't know, when I was like writing about Robin Thicke, for example, which like, and I like hated Robin Thicke, and like he was the biggest misogynist of all time, and I just like went after him, and with snark and humor, but still like I was really mean to him. And I kind of feel bad. Like I kind of feel like, well, if you're a person who likes Robin Thicke, or who doesn't think that his lyrics are problematic, if I'm coming at it from a perspective where like he's a raging misogynist and you don't start from that perspective, then you may stop reading what I'm writing, or you may stop watching what I'm saying. So yeah, I think more than ever, especially given 2016 election, we are living in a very polarized world. But when we actually talk to each other, it changes everything. Like I went to CPAC, the mecca of conservative, politics, and I obviously don't agree with a lot of conservative ideologies, but like we still had a laugh and had a great time, and every single person I talked to there, like at the end of the day, like we may not agree on everything, but we're like human beings and we can have a conversation. So I hope to bring more of that, less polarization and more conversation.
Nate, what are you telling your clients now about either managing existing communities or how they should build communities at new companies?
It's a great question. I mean, I think it's figuring out the core motivation. I mentioned this earlier. The example that comes to mind, and pivot quickly to another Obama example, but my job in 2012 was to run the online advertising team, and we had, by the end of it, more than $100 million that was, a bunch of different purposes and resources that, are kind of crazy. But that leveraged, and a lot of brands and companies that we work with now, have similar types of resources at their disposal. That means that when you're constructing things like this, you're working with vendors, you're working with partners to engage people that are outside your community, to bring them into the community. In that context, it might have been around getting people to do voter registration, or to be part of an online discussion about a policy issue, or whatever it may be. That affords you an ability, because there's real money on the line, to enforce some norms around how that content will be distributed, will be released, could be commented on, could be replied to. So I can think of a bunch of cases where that was part of the initial conversation. You have, if we're going to do an upfront for $10 million, these are the list of demands we're going to have, and they're going to have performance parts of that. Of course, that's where you literally make your money on. But you could also have norms around and how people can engage, what they can say. And I don't mean to censor them. I mean to enforce a way of having positive commentary or positive dialogue. And I think a lot of times brands currently are really thinking about that bottom line in the short-term sense, and they could spend more time making sure that the communities they're building foster a longer-term vision that's more in line with the community that they want to be creating.
And Rob, as you scale, actually, that's probably a big question. How do you keep this intimacy that you developed as you get past 25,000 users to 250,000 users to 2.5 million?
Pray. No, but we have to just continue to grow with the demands of the community. Right now, we have the luxury, I think, of having in a scalable sense, an intimate community that we can manage, if things go awry. That's something that we think about seriously every day. I won't say that we have a plan of action. There's no like software in place. I know we spoke about that before coming to here. Is anybody implementing any software or something that helps police or monitor the behavior and help curb it? We aren't there yet. We've just been doing what's working, and hopefully as the community grows. Because also, just one thing to point out is that the moderators and the mediators are actually members of the community. They aren't like paid staff. These are roles that community members take on because they exemplify good work. So the hope is as the community grows, there'll just be more roles, more moderators, more mediators, more people to kind of help model the behavior that we want, the site to stand for.
Right on.
And a lot of praying.
Well, it's interesting because you think about it in the context of Reddit and how Reddit's kind of lost control of some of its communities.
Right.
Yeah. You know, in a lot of interesting ways too, like you see, and me being within the artist relations realm, you know, again, a major part of my job is bringing artists to the community and, you know, back and forth dialogue and communication. And, you know, you see on Reddit those AMA style things go south very quickly, or on Twitter, you know, Robin Thicke had one a couple of years ago. And that's not to say that, you know, the conversation about Robin Thicke being a misogynist wasn't a conversation to be had. It's just maybe Twitter wasn't the right forum for it. And maybe Genius isn't the right forum for it either. You know, but yeah, things go south very quickly.
You know when it's going to be a bad one. Every time a client wants to do an AMA, I'm like, here are the bad ones. Please go investigate. Do you have any hidden secrets that I should know about first? So I wanted to open the floor up for questions for the last 5 minutes of our panel. Does anybody have anything they want to ask any of our illustrious panel? Windsor?
Go, girl.
As someone who went through this,
Uh-huh.
what is your position? I think I really identify with what you said, is that you are in a situation where you are often the person that's perpetrating the hate, and then sometimes you're just you're receiving it.
Right.
Where is the balance? I think the example I would use Trump. Fuck, you just got to use him. But we're in a situation where
You were following up his name with the F word.
well, you know, fuck him. So you're sitting, you're getting ratings because his antics are absolutely exactly what we 2016, not we, maybe the royal we, but like the lower we is totally buying into. But then at the same time, everything that he's saying is the antithesis of what it is that you would really want out there, but you know that's what people feed on. I think it's sort of like the Kim Kardashian effect.
Right.
Where do you feel that you fit, all of you guys maybe, you fit in the middle? And then like a follow-up to your comment about managing a community, you can manage it at a certain level, but then you can't, do you have a plan beyond that level? So 25,000 is easy to sort of negotiate, but 250, 2 million, that starts to become a different conversation. And I've obviously, Kate will tell you offline, why I know that it's really hard to manage that. But what is your plan, if you have a plan, and does your company have an idea of what's the best way to sort of go about that? Are you comfortable at where you're at until you feel like you can go to the next level?
Right.
Rob?
Me first? Yeah. Right now, we're comfortable where we're at to answer that question. We don't have any reason to believe that how we do it won't work. But obviously, hopefully we'll be entering new frontier, and we know that we'll encounter problems, and we just have to deal with them. You almost try to stop the problems when they start. So once you see things start growing and kind of getting out of control, we have to figure out new ways and think about our company differently. Right now we're comfortable where we're at, but we're not so naive to think that the bigger we get, the more problematic things will get. But you know, I couldn't speak of a specific plan right now today. But it's a great question and something that we're actively thinking about. Thank you.
Lucy?
Okay, the Trump thing. I feel like if Trump, I feel like we could have a whole panel about Trump. I think about Trump a lot, I'm very honest with you. Media is having very, very critical conversations and self-critical conversations about how to cover someone like Trump, how to stop a guy like Trump, and what our responsibility is in perpetrating his monopoly on everything. And I absolutely think that we have a responsibility. I will say that none of us knew that this was going to unfold the way that it did. A lot of people you'll notice who are on the Trump beat are like 22-year-olds who just started because they were like, here, you go on, you're following, you know, Santorum or whoever, just add Trump to that. And in the end, they're like on TV every single day and like traveling, and it's great for them because they're getting all of this experience. But you know, when he went down the escalator, we put cameras on him and we're like, okay, we're gonna let him do his stupid show and then it'll be done, but it wasn't. And it's been growing ever since. And what happened, I mean, but so the balancing act is, do we, and I've thought about this, like, do we let what he says and the hateful things that he says and the bigotry go unchecked? Do we not cover it and then give him more of a monopoly over what he says and not question it and not criticize it? And Trump is very vocal in the way that he hates the press. By, at his last, Super Tuesday 2.0, like handing out steaks and discontinued Trump products, and just saying like, oh, they won't even take them, they're dishonest. Like and obviously last night with what happened at the Trump rally and the violence, and the word Trump is now a racial slur that children and teenagers and young people are using. I mean, it's affecting not just voters, it's affecting everyone. And yes, the cameras are on him, but we need to put the cameras on the hateful things that he's saying and have a space to be critical of it. Huffington Post, for example, after every article, well, at first they only covered him in the entertainment section and put all of his stuff in the entertainment section, and then they ended up just having, at the end of every Huffington Post article that mentions Trump, it says, Donald Trump is a bigot, a racist, and a whole, I mean, it's true. So I think that's showing some responsibility, but it's really hard. I mean, I'm like open to suggestions from everyone, because it is something that everyone in the media is sort of struggling with, like, because you wanna call it out, but you also don't want to give him more oxygen. Anyway, I have like so many thoughts. I'm happy to talk about it.
Do you have a question?
Yeah, so I like your metaphor of the harassment in the office, of someone walking in and cursing you out, and there being a clearly defined framework for that. However, as we work more and more online in social media, the boundary box of the office bleeds, and the ability for harassers to affect our lives and get information about us, and I think about what happened with Sarkeesian and Gamergate, about her family's address being published, and that's just one of many. What can we do to help mitigate that, other than not doing our jobs? And two, what responsibility does the workplace have for that kind of mitigation? Because we are required to do this as part of our jobs.
So I actually had an incident. I was at Newsweek 2 years ago, right when we did the cover story. We actually launched here at South by Southwest, where Lee McGrath Goodman, published a story about the guy that allegedly made Bitcoin, discovered Bitcoin. And our entire C-suite ended up doxxed. It got all sorts of, there was much excitement. Everything, that thing that could have happened during that story. And it led to a lot of sleepless nights on all our staff's part, not only because Lee was getting death threats and she had enraged the Bitcoin community in a way that I was unfamiliar with. And we hadn't realized that we would need crisis comms so much that we called Edelman's emergency line. But I think I had never seen that scale, but we did decide that at that point, I was a director, so I was an executive for the team. We did decide that we were culpable for dealing with the distinct threats. So we were responsible for any distinct threats that had to do with her person. And that meant security in her home. And we were responsible for distinct threats to her digital existence. And one of those things was bank accounts and things like that, making sure that she had credit report stuff turned on, all of the e-security things you've never heard of. We did all of them. And then we had a universal policy that everyone had to follow through on, securing their information. Because I had never, before that I had worked on community management with Al Jazeera, and we had the Israel-Palestine debate waging war on our Facebook page, which is a nightmare to manage as a community person. And we also had a lot of Assad supporters who were messaging us fake videos that we then had to evaluate that were super gruesome. In those two cases, both Newsweek and on Al Jazeera, there wasn't a policy in place to deal with the impact that this has on your employees, because no one knows what exactly you're supposed to do. It's a third-party platform. You are a reporter. All you did was your job to the best of your ability at the time, given your understanding of the circumstances. The fact that the folks who consume the Fourth Estate chose to then attack you, we don't know exactly what we're supposed to do on a case-by-case basis. And I think every community management company actually, or company that has a community really struggles with this policy. You know, it's great to hear that Vox is taking all this action, but there's no legal reason that they would have to. They're choosing to do it as internet good citizens. They're choosing to do it because they see a need and they see that their employees are exhausted by the constant harassment. They see a need for any number of other reasons to solve this problem. And we've all been here all day, intermittently at least, trying to figure out what our responsibilities are. But we have no legal reason. Like there's no obligation on the part of your employer to deal with the fact that due to your work, you are being constantly harassed. And I think that's the struggle. Like, we don't have legislative reasons. This isn't covered by OSHA. It's not covered by anything else, because you don't know if this is the new reality, if the past 10 years of online harassment are the way it's going to be, or if a switch is going to flip in the next 10 years and this is suddenly just going to have been a blip and we're all going to be remembering what used to happen. So from my experience, you know, I think as an employer, if my employees are complaining about a particular account or a particular situation that we've put them in, we do our best to use technology to help them. And that we were discussing software earlier. The reason that we were discussing software is because sometimes you just need to be able to get rid of somebody. You know, sometimes it is that person, that IP address, the entity that lives at that IP address is not a good entity. And it needs to disappear from your community for whatever reason. And software can help that, but if you are a smaller entity, if you're a smaller publication, if you're a smaller website, if you are a news organization, or if you're an e-commerce site and you happen to vend something that isn't popular for some reason, and you know, you've seen this from pizza places to hair salons to that poor dentist in Wisconsin who I disagree with his shooting of the lion, but his business was destroyed. Like, you need the software to help you in those circumstances, and you may not have access or resources. So I'm hoping that whatever solution we come up with is open source, so that people can afford to use it, whatever it might be. And with that, I think we've just hit time. Do you guys have any closing remarks?
Oh, you go ahead.
I'm good.
Oh, I have one then. No, I think it's important. Just, you know, we've had this has like been a great conversation. Kate, you were an excellent moderator. Thank you to all the people who came late on a Saturday night. I hope you all come and have a drink next door. The wine is free, and I think there are snacks. But I think online harassment is an internet problem, but it's not just an internet problem, it's a societal problem. The people who undergo the most harassment online are the people who already undergo the most oppression and harassment in real life. And the harassment that women, that people of color, that LGBT community experiences online is similar to the hatred and the oppression that they experience on the sidewalks. So unless we address that bigger issue, especially with education and young people who are growing up in this world, with a guy like Trump who might become president, we need to address those issues head on if we want to solve the issue online.
Sure. Nate?
Well, two other thoughts. I mean, and again, to echo, thanks for moderating and everyone for participating and coming. I think you know, we are prone to putting this kinds of issues, you know, because they're so prominent and so important as just for individuals, but you know, companies need to take this stuff seriously even beyond the policy side of it. You know, I'm thinking right now of Yelp, which has gotten in so much trouble in their own brand because they don't moderate people having negative content and devalues the whole product. That's a community problem. That's a problem where they don't have a policy in place to make what they're doing be reflective of the values that they want it to be exhibiting, namely that reviews mean something. It's a very different problem than, you know, a reporter getting harassed. Not, you know, it's a much more personal one. But like, that's a thing that has to be built into the DNA of the organization. As we see, you know, a Trump-type personality getting so much attention, I'm actually gratified that that is happening. Surprisingly, not because I agree with pretty much anything that he's saying, but I think those kinds of expressions and thoughts have always been there, and it's getting a lot more attention than it ever has had before in a context where eventually, hopefully, he'll get called out for it, and the other people who have gotten away with it in much less obvious ways are going to have a response to it. And if that pushes the politics in the longer term than just the next 3 months towards a more positive environment, so much the better for all of us.
And Rob, anything else? No?
Yeah, no, I think, at least my experience at Genius has been positive so far. I hope that it can be a model for the rest of the internet, but also understand that that may be a bit idealistic, or a lot idealistic. The world doesn't operate in that way. But if there's anything to take out of the Genius model, is that, if we're fostering our communities to operate towards one specific kind of goal and a common goal, you can have positive, maybe more positive interactions where, someplace like Twitter or Facebook, and it's just the Wild West out there. Again, completely idealistic.
Yeah, you guys have had a really good experience so
Yeah.
far. I'm glad somebody did.
My friend over here now just scared the hell out of me, so we're going to draw up a plan. But no, we're going to continue to work, and as the company grows and the community grows, to help our model become more scalable and hopefully curb.
Well,
We've been lucky so far.
Yeah, don't forget your employees. I think the thing that we tend to do is under-resource the community teams, and then shit happens, and it's terrible.
And hopefully the software solutions you're talking about,
Yeah.
vProwd earlier, and tools like that, which hopefully will be models for further ways of having more on the tool side and pressuring the Twitters and Facebooks of the world to take this seriously.
One more thing too, because you said don't forget the employees, and even if it isn't my specific job to manage the community, we're actually taught over at Genius that it's all of our jobs. We take an hour every week where we all sit, the whole entire company, and go and annotate and use the site as community members. And we all do it outside of that hour, but it's 1 hour that we all take together, and it really helps the community, the people outside of the company, feel like a stronger connection with the people who are actually working in the company. So
That's the most proactive I've heard for a while.
Fingers crossed.
Thank you.
Thank you.